What's up, Joe? What's up, everybody? Jeff Fannell, Sports 360. The past week or so has been tough as we have witnessed the passing of John Thompson and Tom Seaver, two gigantic figures in sports. In addition to that, actor Chadwick Boseman also passed away, and he burst on the scene several years ago in the movie 42, in which he portrayed the baseball immortal Jackie Robinson. And Chadwick passed away at the age of 43 after battling colon cancer for 4 years, a battle that he kept secret from the public and from his fans as he continued to make movies. In addition to 42, Chadwick also starred as James Brown, and in the movie Thurgood, he played Thurgood Marshall. Um, and of course, he was also the Black Panther, probably his most famous role. And he passed away at the age of 43. And so, if you were a sports fan, more than likely you saw Chadwick in the movie 42 and you saw the talent, you saw the ability, you saw the greatness that was in him. And for someone to pass away at such a young age, at the age of 43, is certainly a tragedy. And so that sort of got things started in a wrong direction, if you ask me, because that was followed by the passing of longtime Georgetown basketball coach John Thompson. John Thompson was literally a giant of a man, 6'10", 270 pounds, but he was even bigger on the inside in terms of his courage, in terms of his integrity, and as a man who stood for principle. He was a great basketball coach, won an NCAA championship, won an Olympic gold medal. But, he was also someone who was dedicated to his players, insisting that they get an education. And not only standing up for his players as far as getting an education, but I'll never forget when John Thompson, before a game, actually walked off the court as he was protesting the NCAA's implementation of what was called Proposition 48. And it was a rule that would bar scholarship athletes from playing in their freshman year if they didn't score at a certain level on the college entrance exam. And Coach Thompson believed that the college entrance exam was biased towards disadvantaged students um, of any color. And because he thought it was unfair, he walked off the court in protest. Fitting at this particular time when we see athletes protesting, and also see people who would rather athletes and others simply stop protesting and allow things that many feel are unfair to continue. But there's protests going on now, and Thompson was also someone who would protest. He would stand up for what was right. And as an African American young man, watching John Thompson and seeing him take stands and seeing him be a champion of education and seeing him unafraid to speak up and to speak out really drew me to him. Even though, I grew up in Queens and eventually graduated from St. John's, when I would watch NCAA basketball, at that time, the Big East was one of the main conferences in the NCAA. Had great teams, great players. but also had some great coaches, right? Jim Calhoun at Connecticut, Raleigh Massimino at Villanova, Louis Carnesecca at St. John's, and of course, John Thompson. But I was drawn to John Thompson. I was drawn to his players. I was drawn to the whole Hoya paranoia at the time. But he was a great coach. As I said, won an NCAA championship. But he was also someone who would stand up and do what he believed was right, whether it was walking off the court in opposition to Proposition 48 or it was standing by Allen Iverson and and bringing him into the Georgetown program after Iverson was convicted of a brawl or his part in a brawl in a bowling alley in Hampton, Virginia, prior to beginning his college career. Many schools backed off of Iverson, who was one of the top recruits in the country, but Thompson stood by Iverson, brought him in, and the rest, as they say, is history. And so John Thompson passing certainly is a blow, right? And certainly for those of us who watched him, for those who knew him personally, it's even more of a blow. But for fans of NCAA basketball, for fans of sport, and also for the integrity of the game and of the man himself, John Thompson will be missed. And then we have the passing of Tom Seaver. Tom Seaver, one of the greatest pitchers in the history of Major League Baseball, a New York Met. And, I've said it before on this show, I'm a Mets fan. I grew up in Queens, not too far from Shea Stadium. Now it's called Citi Field. They have a new stadium, but, at the time, Shea Stadium. And I grew up, man, watching the Mets, listening to the Mets on the radio, and that included Tom Seaver. And listen, Tom Seaver was the Mets. Tom Seaver was the best player on the Mets. He was the face of the franchise. He was the guy. And as a young boy, who was into baseball, listening to baseball, watching baseball when I could, and as a Mets fan, it began with Tom Seaver. Now, when I would go out and play baseball with my friends, I never pretended or imagined or imitated Tom Seaver. As much as I admired his talent and his ability, my guys were Cleon Jones and Tommy Agee. Those were the guys, right? They were black players on the Mets, and as a young African American kid growing up, I would imitate them, but I appreciated the greatness of Tom Seaver. And if you've been reading about the passing of Tom, you know that he was a Rookie of the Year. You know that he won 3 Cy Young Awards with the Mets. He has over 300 wins, over 3,600 strikeouts, 61 shutouts. It was a different time back then. Pitchers didn't just go 7 innings or 6 innings and then you brought in the relief corps. They went the whole 9. But he had 61 shutouts and a career ERA of 2.86. The numbers speak for themselves. But in many ways, the numbers don't even capture the whole story. Because his presence and his excellence year in and year out for the New York Mets was something to behold. I've never seen anything like it since. And by far, Tom Seaver, the greatest Met ever. And so when I heard of his passing, as I'm recording this now on Thursday morning, September 3rd, Tom had passed away last night. And when I heard of it, it really saddened me because it was part of my childhood. It was part of my upbringing, in a sense, as a sports fan, and certainly as a Mets fan. I remember listening to the games, and he was just phenomenal, just phenomenal. And I also recall when he got traded from the Mets to the Cincinnati Reds, which I thought was the worst thing that could have happened to my beloved New York Mets. And for a guy who came so close while pitching for the Mets to throwing a no-hitter, but he never did. He threw a number of one-hitters. It seemed wrong to me that after being traded to Cincinnati, Tom went out and threw his first and only no-hitter as a member of the Cincinnati Reds. Just didn't seem right. Because for me, Tom Seaver was, always would be, always should have been a New York Met. So to hear of his passing as a Mets fan is certainly, and as a baseball fan, is certainly something that really, really hit me deep. But the other thing, and I'll close with this, is when we see the passing of a young talent, relatively young talent, in Chadwick Boseman at the age of 43, and then we see these giants of the game, these icons, these great coaches and players in John Thompson and Tom Seaver passing away. All of it just reminds us, particularly at this time, at a time of a pandemic and unrest and uncertainty all around us, it reminds us of the frailty of life, especially with someone as young as Chadwick. And for Thompson and Seaver, for those of us who grew up watching them and enjoying their contributions either as a coach or as a player, it lets us know that we probably have more road behind us than in front of us. And so it places an urgency on the time that we have right now. And that's heightened even the more during this pandemic and during this uncertainty brought about by the unrest. We have to be about it. We have to make sure that whatever it is that we believe that we're called to do, that we get to doing it. Because as we've seen, whether you're young or whether are of full age, at some point, right, we all pass on. And we need to make sure that whatever it is that we're called to do, we put our hands to the work and get it done. And so Chadwick Boseman, John Thompson, and Tom Seaver passing away. And for those of us who are in sports or enjoy sports, a level of sadness in each one of their passings, and yet also a timely reminder for us to be about it. That's it for me. I'll catch you all next time. Be good, be safe. Jeff Fannell, Sports 360.